This is unlike anything you would normally see on a 1990s PC. Two vertical rows of LEDs flickering constantly on the front of this computer. If you watched the previous episode, you already know that each column corresponds to one of the two processors inside the computer, a small detail that visualizes not only the power of a dual CPU system, but also the capabilities of the operating system itself. Because the machine we're looking at today, the BeBox, was not built simply to run software. It was built to demonstrate the vision of BE Inc. and their operating system BeOS. It's obsolete technology no one uses today, but I'll bring it back to life. I'm the vintage collector and these are my stories. In the previous episode we already looked at BeOS in many shades and colors. An operating system designed in the early 1990s by BE Inc., built from the ground up for multimedia, preemptive multitasking and symmetric multiprocessing at a time when most desktop systems still relied on cooperative multitasking. To demonstrate that vision, the company built its own computer, the BeBox.
The hardware design that we use multiple PowerPCs, two 603s in our first implementation. Next year we'll have a 604E implementation, and by the end of '96 we'll have a portable machine and we'll have a 4-processor 620 for the holy grail of digital video editing, no compression.
The first model appeared in 1995 and shipped with two 66 MHz PowerPC 603 processors. 1 year later, the system was updated with faster PowerPC 603E processors. This is the later version of that machine. And before we go any further, a quick note. This particular BeBox is not actually part of my own collection. It was kindly loaned to me by Stefan, another Swiss collector who travelled across Switzerland to bring it here so we could take a closer look. Considering how rare these systems are today, that was an opportunity I could hardly refuse. Out of roughly 1,800 BeBoxes ever produced, at least 6 are currently known to exist here in Switzerland alone.
And so one of the standing jokes we had at the time was, if you wanted your boss to think you were working really hard, you'd run a program that would make both CPU LED banks run up and down very quickly. And then he or she would think you're very busy.
Working. So this whole bezel, so you had some kind of output from the CPU to drive the light plan.
Yeah, it was just more of a monitoring system.
Opening the BeBox is a slightly unusual experience. The outer shell of the case is held in place by two extremely long screws. They are nearly 5 cm in length, which feels slightly excessive until you realize how the enclosure is constructed. Once those screws are removed, the entire outer shell slides forward and lifts away as a single U-shaped piece, exposing the internal frame of the system. Inside sits a very large motherboard. And it's true what Wikipedia says, it follows the AT form factor. No, not baby AT, but full size. See how it extends all the way up? A few unusual details on the mainboard quickly stand out. One of them is the presence of several glass fuses. These are not protecting the main power rail of the system, instead they are connected to the interface lines of something called the GeekPort. The GeekPort is a 37-pin connector located on the back of the system, and it was designed as a general-purpose hardware interface. Through it, developers could access digital I/O lines as well as analog inputs and outputs directly from the computer, comparable to GPIO pins found on many present-day single-board computers like the Raspberry Pi. Along the back panel, another interesting detail appears. The system uses a traditional DIN connector for the keyboard, which was still common on many PCs at the time. But the mouse already connects through a PS2 port. This particular combination is rather unusual, as PC compatibles either had DIN and DB9 connectors for keyboard and mouse, or they already featured PS2 connectors for both. I've never seen a machine practically mixing the two. But hey, here we are. Besides, the BeBox offers a generous set of connectors: SCSI, parallel, 4 serial ports, joystick ports, MIDI and multiple audio interfaces. Back to the mainboard, where on the lower right we find the most distinctive part of the entire machine: 2 PowerPC processors.
The most glaring example of that is the fact that today's PCs are uniprocessors. We hold the view that no PC should ever be seen with less than 2 processors.
Be originally promoted the idea with the slogan "one processor per person is not enough", and this system was designed to demonstrate the benefits of symmetric multiprocessing. And it wasn't particularly expensive when compared to other mid-90s machines. The 2 models sold for $1,600 and $2,995 respectively. Not too bad for a true S&P machine. However, choosing 2 processors came with a technical compromise. The BeBox is built around the Motorola MPC105 Grackle memory controller. This chip could either support a single processor with external L2 cache or 2 processors without it. B chose the dual processor configuration, which means the BeBox actually has no L2 cache at all. This decision gives the machine a somewhat unusual performance profile. Single-threaded tasks are not particularly fast, but when multiple threads are active, the system begins to show its intended strength. And if you're wondering what this socket is, it's a logic analyzer port used by B during development. The fact that it is still present on the mainboard reveals the machine's development heritage. Interfaces like this are normally removed before a system reaches customers. Before powering the system on, there's one more piece of hardware worth examining. Behind the front panel sits the LED board responsible for the famous Blinkenlights. Today, one would probably build this using a small LED strip, but here it is still one large PCB. And it doesn't only carry the 2 LED bars, it also holds 2 tactile micro switches which are connected to the front panel buttons. These act as the soft power and reset switches. But you certainly want to see the LEDs come alive, don't you? Alright, let's start the system. One of the things that impressed reviewers in the mid-1990s was how quickly BeOS booted. From power on to the desktop, it could take as little as 10 to 15 seconds, which was noticeably faster than many contemporary systems. Those numbers were probably measured on earlier developer releases of BeOS. They certainly don't hold up with BeOS 4.5, which is running on this system here and takes roughly 30 seconds to boot. And I was told by Stefan, the owner of this machine, that BeOS 5 runs quite poorly on this hardware. That's why he decided to stick with BeOS 4.5 instead. Here's the classic spinning teapot OpenGL demo we already saw in earlier episodes. By modern standards, the frame rate is not particularly impressive, but graphical performance is not really the point here. While the demo runs, we can start playing music in the background and continue interacting with the system at the same time. And watch the Blinkenlights dancing tango as the machine performs. Even though the frame rate of the GL teapot drops a little, we hear no stuttering, and I can still drag the window all over the desktop without disturbing the other tasks, because every single window runs in its own thread. This is where the design philosophy behind BeOS truly becomes visible, and it is also worth remembering what kind of machine this was. The dual 133 MHz BeBox sold for just under $3,000 in 1996. This was certainly more expensive than a fairly typical single-processor Pentium 133 PC, which could be had for somewhere around $2,000, sometimes even a little less. But true dual-processor x86 systems were in a completely different class. Those were usually Pentium Pro workstations or servers, and prices could easily climb well past $6,000. Seen in that context, the BeBox was not cheap, but its price was surprisingly aggressive for a genuine SMP machine in 1996. Despite its technical ambition, the BeBox had a very short life. In early 1997, Be made the decision to stop building hardware entirely and focus purely on developing BeOS for other platforms. For a company of roughly 50 people, investing a lot of hardware engineering resources was simply unrealistic. The BeBox had served its purpose, and once Be began licensing BeOS to other hardware vendors, continuing to sell their own machines would have created a conflict of interest. So the BeBox quietly disappeared, remaining one of the more unusual computers of the 1990s. It was a system built to demonstrate ideas that would only reach the mainstream desktop almost a decade later, when dual-core processors finally began appearing in consumer PCs around the mid-2000s. Before we wrap up, a special thank you to Stefan for kindly bringing this BeBox for the episode. And if any of you happen to visit the next Vintage Computing Festival in Switzerland, you may even recognize him there exhibiting these smacky education computers developed at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in 1974. I'm the Vintage Collector, and this was my story for today. Thanks for watching, and see you again next Sunday. Next time on the Vintage Collector. Let's explore what really happened after BeOS disappeared, from leaked builds like BeOS 5.1 Dano to controversial successes like Zeta and the community efforts that tried to keep the system alive. Then we follow the story of Haiku, the ambitious open source project rebuilding BeOS from scratch, and finally try something unusual, booting Haiku on this 2009 Intel Mac Mini.